I'm Ethan Montgomery, 32, the black sheep of a family obsessed with status and prestigious careers. For years, they've seen me as the underachiever, the disappointment who settled for construction work. At our annual family meeting last month, they crossed a line when Uncle Stanley laughed. "Poor Ethan can't even afford a house in this market." The room erupted in laughter. Little did they know, I was about to change our family dynamic forever with just one document. Before I continue this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoy stories about sweet revenge and family members who learn their lesson the hard way. Growing up in Brookline, a wealthy suburb of Boston, meant living in the shadow of success. My parents, Brian and Margaret Montgomery, built their lives around the appearance of prosperity and achievement. Dad was a corporate executive who measured his worth by the size of his corner office, while Mom dedicated herself to maintaining our family's social standing in Boston's elite circles. Our colonial-style home was less a warm family environment and more a showcase for their accomplishments. Walls adorned with degrees, awards, and photos with notable figures. From an early age, I understood the Montgomery family hierarchy. My older brother Garrett stood at the top, the golden child who followed Dad's careful roadmap to success. He attended Harvard Medical School and became a cardiovascular surgeon, a fact my mother managed to slip into every conversation with friends, neighbors, or even cashiers at Whole Foods. "My son, the doctor just performed a groundbreaking procedure," she would say, beaming with pride. My younger sister Kimberly completed the trifecta of parental dreams by becoming a corporate attorney at a prestigious Boston law firm. She was always driven, competitive, and naturally aligned with my parents' values. Her Yale law degree hung prominently in our family home's main hallway, impossible to miss when entering. Then there was me, Ethan, the middle child who never quite fit the Montgomery mold. Where Garrett and Kimberly thrived on competition and recognition, I found joy in creating, building, and understanding how things worked. My bedroom was filled with half-finished projects, blueprints, and books about architecture and design. When I brought home an A in woodshop, my father's response was, "That's nice, but how are your calculus grades?" The calculus grades were fine, but that wasn't the point. Our family had a tradition that exemplified our dynamic perfectly. The annual Montgomery Family Conference. This wasn't a casual family gathering, it was a formal assessment of everyone's yearly achievements. We'd gather around the mahogany dining table, and one by one, family members would present their accomplishments like corporate executives at a shareholder meeting. Garrett would discuss his medical breakthroughs or research publications. Kimberly would talk about her high-profile cases and client acquisitions. My parents would detail their professional achievements, charitable board positions, and investment successes. Then attention would turn to me, and the room would grow quiet with anticipation that inevitably turned to disappointment. When I graduated from Boston University with a degree in business management, my parents expected me to pursue an MBA or at minimum join a prestigious firm. Instead, I took a job as a project manager with a local construction company. You would have thought I announced a plan to become a professional street performer. "A construction job? With your education?" My father couldn't hide his disgust. "The Montgomery name has been associated with excellence for generations. It's a management position, Dad. I'll be overseeing multimillion-dollar projects." I tried to explain. "Managing laborers," my mother said with a dismissive wave. "We didn't pay for your education so you could wear a hard hat." What they couldn't understand was that I saw something they didn't. Working in construction gave me direct insight into property values, building costs, and market trends. While my salary was modest compared to Garrett's or Kimberly's, I was positioning myself at the intersection of practical knowledge and opportunity. At family gatherings, my career choice became background noise, something the family had reluctantly accepted but never embraced. My father introduced me as Ethan, who works in construction, his tone suggesting I was still figuring things out. My brother would ask patronizing questions about hammering nails all day, while my sister would offer to connect me with some real opportunities whenever she'd had a few glasses of wine. What none of them knew was that beneath my apparent career mediocrity, I was developing a passion and expertise for real estate investment. Every night after work, I studied market trends, property values, and investment strategies. I tracked neighborhoods in transition and properties with untapped potential. I saved every penny from my disappointing job while my siblings splurged on luxury cars, designer wardrobes, and exclusive club memberships. In our family's eyes, I was the underachiever, but I was playing a different game altogether. They were pursuing status. I was building wealth. They chased approval. I sought independence. They lived for today's accolades. I was investing in tomorrow's security. And for years, I kept my growing knowledge and ambitions completely to myself. Let them think what they wanted. I had plans they couldn't begin to imagine. My real journey began 3 years after I started at Sullivan Construction. I'd been patiently saving, studying the market, and waiting for the right opportunity. Boston's real estate market was notoriously expensive, but I'd identified several neighborhoods on the verge of transformation, places the wealthy turned their noses up at but that showed clear signs of potential. One Tuesday evening after work, I was grabbing coffee at a local shop when I overheard an older man talking about a property deal that had fallen through. Something in his assessment of the situation caught my attention. He spoke with the confidence of someone who knew what others didn't. "Excuse me," I said, introducing myself. "I couldn't help overhearing about that property on Westland Avenue. What made you interested in it?" That conversation with Raymond Wilson changed everything. In his 70s, Raymond had been investing in Boston real estate since the 1970s. He didn't have fancy degrees or family connections, just decades of hard-earned wisdom and a knack for seeing value where others didn't. "Most people look at a rundown property and see problems," Raymond told me that day. "Smart investors look at the same property and see the difference between what it is and what it could be. That gap is where money is made." We talked for hours. Raymond had no children interested in real estate, and he seemed to appreciate my genuine curiosity and knowledge. I peppered him with questions about cap rates, renovation costs, and neighborhood transitions. By the end of our conversation, he offered to show me a duplex he was considering in Dorchester. The property was a mess: water damage, outdated systems, and tenants who hadn't paid rent in months. But the bones were good, the location was improving, and the price was right because the owner needed to sell quickly. "I don't have enough for a down payment on something like this," I admitted. "What do you have?" Raymond asked bluntly. I told him about my savings, $47,000 that I'd accumulated through aggressive frugality, while my family thought I was struggling to make ends meet. "That's enough for us to partner on this," Raymond said. "I'll put up the rest, you'll manage the renovation since you have construction knowledge, and we'll split the profit when we sell or refinance." With my heart pounding, I agreed. Within a month, we owned the duplex. I spent every evening and weekend there, coordinating repairs, learning hands-on about plumbing, electrical work, and dealing with contractors. My colleagues at Sullivan Construction became invaluable resources, often helping me after hours or recommending reliable subcontractors. My family, meanwhile, remained clueless. When I missed a Sunday dinner to deal with a burst pipe at the duplex, I simply said I was working overtime. When Garrett asked why my clothes always seemed worn or paint spattered, I explained that construction management is hands-on sometimes. 6 months later, Raymond and I refinanced a fully renovated duplex, pulled out our initial investment plus a healthy profit, and immediately purchased 2 more properties. Our partnership worked because Raymond had capital and experience, while I contributed sweat equity, industry connections, and a willingness to learn. All this time, my family's condescension only intensified. During one particularly painful Christmas dinner, Garrett, fresh from purchasing a new Audi, asked me if I would ever move out of that starter apartment, or is that a permanent situation? "I'm comfortable where I am," I replied simply. "That's good." My father interjected. "It's important to live within your means." The conversation then shifted to Kimberly's recent trip to the Maldives and my mother's new tennis club membership. No one bothered to ask more about my life or work. They'd already categorized me as the family member who hadn't quite made it. During this period, I met Laura. Unlike my status-conscious family, Laura valued authenticity and purpose over appearances. A kindergarten teacher with a warm smile and intuitive understanding of people, she saw through my family's behavior immediately. "They have no idea who you really are," she said after meeting them for the first time at a family barbecue where I'd been relegated to grill duty while Garrett held court describing his latest surgical technique. "No, they don't," I agreed. "And I'm not ready to tell them yet." "Why not?" she asked. "You're accomplishing amazing things." I considered her question carefully before answering. "I want to succeed on my own terms first. Completely on my own terms. If I tell them now, they'll either try to take credit somehow or find ways to diminish what I'm doing." Laura understood. She became my partner in every sense, helping with property viewings on weekends, organizing paperwork for our growing portfolio, and providing emotional support when dealing with difficult tenants or renovation setbacks. 2 years into my partnership with Raymond, we owned 7 properties across Boston's up-and-coming neighborhoods. I'd quit my job at Sullivan Construction to manage our investments full-time, telling my family I was trying something new in real estate, a half-truth they took as confirmation of my directionless career path. "Real estate?" my mother had said with thinly veiled disappointment. "Like selling houses? I suppose that could be stable enough." "Something like that," I replied, not bothering to correct her assumption that I had become a residential real estate agent. Little did they know that by this point, my net worth had already surpassed that of many of my successful cousins. Raymond and I were now targeting larger multifamily buildings, and I had developed a reputation among local banks as a reliable investor with an excellent track record. The more success I found, the more I kept to myself. I wanted to be absolutely certain of my financial independence before confronting my family's perceptions. I needed to know that when the moment came, there would be no way for them to minimize or explain away what I had built. That moment was approaching faster than I realized. By year 3 of my investment journey, Raymond and I had refined our approach to a science. We targeted undervalued properties in transitional neighborhoods, renovated efficiently using my construction industry connections, and either held them for cash flow or sold for substantial profits. Our partnership had evolved from mentor-mentee to equal collaborators, with Raymond providing the wisdom of experience and me bringing energy, industry knowledge, and an intuitive understanding of emerging neighborhood trends. "You have a gift for this business," Raymond told me as we walked through our latest acquisition, a 6-unit building in Jamaica Plain. "You see potential where others see problems." We had expanded beyond residential properties into small commercial spaces, a neighborhood coffee shop, a local bookstore building, a small office complex. Each investment strengthened our portfolio and increased our borrowing capacity for larger deals. While my investment business flourished in private, my family relationships deteriorated further. The annual Montgomery Family Conference continued to be an exercise in status comparison, with my contributions becoming increasingly sidelined. My parents had begun excluding me from certain family gatherings, charity galas, country club events, and dinner parties with important connections, claiming they were being practical about guest lists. "These events are really more suited to professional networking," my mother explained after I discovered I had been excluded from a holiday party. "Garrett and Kimberly can make connections for their careers. It just wouldn't be as beneficial for you, dear." What hurt most wasn't the exclusion itself, but the casual way they dismissed my value. At one family dinner, I overheard my mother talking to her friend in the kitchen, unaware I was approaching. "Ethan? He's still finding his way," she said with a sigh. "We've accepted that he's just not as driven as his siblings. Not everyone can be a doctor or a lawyer, I suppose." I silently retreated without revealing my presence, the words stinging despite my financial success. My net worth had surpassed 7 figures, yet in my mother's eyes, I was still a disappointment. Meanwhile, beneath the surface of our picture-perfect family, cracks were forming that no one wanted to acknowledge. Garrett's marriage was unraveling due to his workaholic tendencies, and rumors of malpractice concerns at his hospital had begun circulating. Rather than address these issues, he compensated by purchasing an ostentatious vacation home on Cape Cod and a new Porsche, status symbols that strained his finances but maintained appearances. Kimberly's law firm had undergone downsizing after losing several major clients. Though she maintained her position, her prospects for partnership had dimmed considerably. The pressure manifested in increased drinking and anxiety medication that she concealed from everyone except me, during a rare vulnerable moment when we ran into each other at a coffee shop away from family oversight. "Don't tell anyone," she had whispered, eyes darting around to ensure no one was listening. "Mom and Dad they wouldn't understand anything less than perfect." I recognized the same pressure that had once crushed me before I chose to forge my own path. "Your worth isn't measured by your job title, Kim," I told her. She had laughed bitterly. "In this family? That's exactly how worth is measured." Our parents, meanwhile, had begun to worry about retirement. Dad's company was undergoing restructuring, and while they maintained their social appearances, I noticed subtle signs of financial strain. The housekeeper's hours reduced, mention of postponing their annual European trip, my father's new interest in discount golf memberships. It was during this period that a unique opportunity presented itself. Through industry connections, I learned about a large apartment building coming on the market in Back Bay, one of Boston's most prestigious neighborhoods. The 12-unit building needed considerable updating but stood in a prime location. The owner was motivated to sell quickly due to health issues and had priced it slightly below market value for a fast, cash-heavy deal. During my initial research on the property, I discovered something that made me pause. The building's tenant list included familiar names. My parents had moved into Unit 8B 2 years earlier, downsizing from our family home while claiming it was for urban convenience. My brother Garrett and his wife occupied the penthouse unit. Two of my cousins and an uncle also rented apartments there. Nearly half the building was occupied by Montgomery family members, none of whom had any idea I was considering purchasing their home. The ethical implications troubled me. Would becoming my family's landlord constitute a conflict of interest? I discussed it with Laura and Raymond over dinner at Raymond's house. "It's business, not personal," Raymond advised. "The building is a good investment regardless of who lives there. You'd be a better landlord than most they could end up with." Laura was more cautious. "It could create complicated dynamics when they find out." "Are you ready for that conversation?" I considered all angles carefully. "The property makes financial sense, and I would treat all tenants fairly, family or not. If anything, I'd be more responsive to maintenance issues than the current absentee landlord." In the end, I decided to move forward through an LLC that obscured my direct ownership. Montgomery family members would technically be renting from Boston Heritage Properties, not from me personally. Raymond helped arrange the financing, and within 60 days, the deal closed. I was now the owner of one of Back Bay's distinguished address buildings, and my family's landlord. The first few months of ownership were revelatory. I implemented needed improvements, updating security systems, renovating the lobby, addressing long-standing maintenance issues that earned appreciation from tenants, including my unwitting family members. "The new management company is finally fixing this place up," my father mentioned during a family dinner, unaware he was complimenting my work. "About time someone invested properly in the building." I nodded politely, suppressing a smile. "Good to hear." As the annual Montgomery Family Conference approached, I found myself at a crossroads. For years I had kept my success private, protecting it from my family's judgment and potential interference. But now, owning the building where many of them lived, maintaining the charade was becoming increasingly complicated. Administrative issues occasionally required my signature as owner, and the building manager had already nearly slipped up twice, almost referring to me during interactions with my parents. The truth would eventually emerge. The question was whether I would reveal it on my terms or wait for circumstance to force my hand. A week before the family meeting, which my parents announced would be held at their apartment in that wonderful building with the new management, Laura and I discussed my options. "You've been hiding your success for years now," Laura said as we walked through one of our newest renovation projects. "At some point, doesn't keeping the secret become its own kind of prison?" "I'm not hiding out of shame," I clarified. "I just wanted to build something undeniably mine, without their interference or attempts to take credit." "And haven't you done that?" she asked gently. "Your net worth now exceeds your entire family's combined. You own the building they live in. What more proof do you need?" She was right. The upcoming family meeting presented a perfect opportunity. After years of dismissal and condescension, I could finally set the record straight. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. That night, I pulled out the property records from my parents' building and made copies of the LLC ownership documents that proved my stake. Looking at them, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here, from the overlooked middle child to a successful investor whose family unwittingly lived in his building. Whatever happened at the upcoming meeting would permanently alter our family dynamic. I just hoped that once the shock wore off, we might finally build relationships based on truth rather than appearances. Acquiring my family's apartment building was the most complex deal I'd navigated. The 12-unit Back Bay property, valued at just under $8.2 million, required creative financing even with my substantial portfolio. Raymond connected me with two silent investors who contributed capital in exchange for equity, while I maintained controlling interest and management rights through my LLC, Boston Heritage Properties. The negotiations were delicate. The seller, an elderly man facing serious health challenges, needed assurance of a quick, clean sale, while I needed favorable terms to make the numbers work. We settled on a slightly below-market price in exchange for an accelerated closing timeline and minimal contingencies. "This is a different league," Raymond warned me as we reviewed the final paperwork. "Bigger properties mean bigger responsibilities and bigger risks. Are you sure you're ready?" "I've been preparing for this for years," I replied, signing the documents that would make me the owner of one of Boston's distinguished addresses, and my family's landlord. The property itself was a classic Boston brownstone, dignified, well-built, but showing signs of deferred maintenance. The previous owner had collected rent faithfully but invested minimally in updates or improvements. The building's systems were functional but outdated, the common areas tired but clean, and several units needed significant modernization. I approached the renovation strategically, focusing first on infrastructure, replacing the ancient boiler system, updating electrical panels, and repairing roof issues, before moving to aesthetic improvements in common areas. The lobby received new lighting, restored original millwork, and modern security features. The hallways saw fresh paint, restored hardwood floors, and upgraded fixtures. Tenants noticed the changes immediately. Maintenance requests were addressed promptly. The building manager, Marcus, who I'd retained and given a substantial raise, reported increased satisfaction across all units. "Your father called yesterday to compliment the new hallway lighting," Marcus informed me one afternoon. "He almost caught me when he asked who made these decisions. I remembered just in time to say the management company instead of using your name." These near misses became increasingly common. My mother encountered me in the lobby one afternoon as I was discussing landscaping options with a contractor. I introduced myself as a consultant for the management company, and she complained about a persistent leak in their guest bathroom. I assured her it would be addressed immediately and personally dispatched a plumber that same day. "The new owners are remarkably responsive," she told my father over dinner that weekend, with me sitting right across from them. I mentioned the leak to one of their consultants, and it was fixed within hours. "That's what we're paying those astronomical rents for," my father grumbled, unaware that his rent was actually below market rate, a decision I'd made for all family members' units to avoid raising suspicions. Meanwhile, my siblings were experiencing their own challenges. Garrett's marriage had officially ended, resulting in an expensive divorce settlement that forced him to liquidate investments at a loss. His hospital had also implemented budget cuts affecting his department's funding. Though he maintained appearances, his financial situation had grown precarious. Kimberly's law firm troubles had intensified. 2 partners had left, taking major clients with them, and rumors of additional layoffs circulated. She'd begun quietly interviewing at other firms while telling our parents that she was considering opportunities that offered better work-life balance. Our parents, ever focused on appearances, seemed oblivious to these struggles. They continued planning extravagant vacations and discussing country club memberships while dropping subtle comparisons between their children at every opportunity. Garrett's medical group is expanding to a new location, my mother announced during Sunday brunch, though I knew from Garrett himself that this was an exaggeration of a minor satellite office opening. And Kimberly just brought in another major client. Kimberly's tight smile revealed this was also news to her. When attention turned to me, the questions remained patronizing. "Still flipping houses or whatever it is you're doing, Ethan?" my father would ask, never bothering to understand my actual business. As the annual family meeting approached, I debated how to handle the revelation. Laura suggested a direct but non-confrontational approach. "Just state the facts without emotion," she advised. "This isn't about revenge. It's about finally being honest about your life." Raymond was more blunt. "They've spent years thinking you're a failure. Don't expect them to suddenly see you clearly just because you show them some documents. People hate having their worldview challenged." The night before the meeting, Laura found me staring at the property documents spread across our dining table. "Having second thoughts?" she asked, sitting beside me. "Wondering if this will change anything meaningful?" I admitted. "Part of me thinks they'll just find a way to minimize this too. Or worse, suddenly pretend they always believed in me." Laura squeezed my hand. "This isn't just about them recognizing your success. It's about you no longer having to diminish yourself to make them comfortable." I nodded, gathering the documents. "You're right. Whatever happens tomorrow, at least there will be truth." That night, I barely slept, rehearsing various scenarios and reactions. By morning, I had settled on a calm, factual approach, letting the documents speak for themselves. Laura would accompany me for moral support, her presence a reminder that regardless of my family's reaction, I had built a life with people who valued me for who I actually was. As we dressed for the meeting, Laura noticed my tension and straightened my tie with a reassuring smile. "Remember," she said, "their reaction says more about them than about you. You've already won by living authentically." I tucked the property documents into a leather portfolio, took a deep breath, and prepared to redefine my place in the Montgomery family hierarchy. The annual Montgomery Family Conference was always held on the last Saturday of April, a tradition my father established to coincide with the end of tax season and the beginning of what he called achievement tracking for the new fiscal year. This particular Saturday dawned clear and crisp, a perfect Boston spring day that belied the storm brewing within me. Laura and I arrived at my parents' building precisely at 2 p.m. The doorman, who knew me as the owner but had been instructed never to reveal this fact, gave me a subtle nod as we entered. "Good afternoon, Mr. Montgomery," he said with a knowing look. The elevator ride to the 8th floor felt interminable. Laura squeezed my hand reassuringly as we ascended. "Remember why you're doing this," she whispered. "This is about honesty, not revenge." My mother answered the door with her perfect hostess smile, the one that never quite reached her eyes. "Ethan, darling." "And Laura, how lovely." Her gaze lingered disapprovingly on Laura's simple but elegant dress, not designer, therefore not quite up to Montgomery standards. The apartment was immaculate as always, decorated in my mother's preferred style of understated luxury. Family photos adorned the walls and surfaces, carefully curated to showcase achievements. Garrett in his surgical scrubs, Kimberly being sworn into the bar, my parents at charity galas with minor celebrities. I noticed with a pang that the only photos of me were from graduation ceremonies, static moments of institutional achievement rather than personal joy. Everyone had already arrived. Garrett stood by the window, nursing a scotch and looking more tired than I'd seen him recently. Kimberly sat stiffly on the sofa, checking her phone with nervous frequency. Various aunts, uncles, and cousins clustered in conversational groups, their voices a gentle murmur of family gossip and professional updates. Uncle Stanley, my father's older brother and the family patriarch since my grandfather's passing, occupied the armchair nearest the fireplace, his traditional seat of authority. His wife Judith sat beside him, her sharp eyes missing nothing. My father emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of drinks. "Everyone's here. Let's get started," he announced, setting down the tray and taking his position at the head of the room. My mother quickly moved to stand beside him, completing the power tableau. The familiar ritual began. My father welcomed everyone, made a few jokes about family quirks, and then launched into his annual State of the Montgomerys address, highlighting family accomplishments since our last gathering. He detailed his own professional successes, a promotion to senior vice president, though I knew from industry contacts that it was largely a ceremonial title amid company restructuring, and my mother's social triumphs, including her appointment to the museum board. Then came the individual reports, starting as always with Garrett. "As you know, I've been developing a new approach to valve replacement surgery," Garrett began, his voice carrying the practiced confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "The hospital has created a special division around my technique, and we're expecting publication in the New England Journal of Medicine this fall." I noticed he didn't mention his divorce or the budget cuts affecting his department. The family responded with appropriate murmurs of approval and a few questions that allowed Garrett to further expound on his brilliance. Kimberly followed with a carefully constructed narrative about her strategic career decisions and exciting new clients, masterfully concealing her professional uncertainty behind legal jargon and confident smiles. Only I could see the slight tremor in her hand as she gesticulated to emphasize a point about a case she claimed to be leading. Various cousins reported on promotions, home purchases, and children's accomplishments. Uncle Stanley detailed his latest investment success. Aunt Judith announced a major donation to their preferred charity. The pattern was clear and unchanging: present your wins, hide your struggles, maintain the Montgomery image of uninterrupted success. Finally, inevitably, attention turned to me. "And what about you, Ethan?" my father asked, his tone carrying that familiar note of lowered expectations. "Still at that construction job, or have you moved on to something else in real estate?" All eyes turned to me, expressions ranging from polite interest to barely concealed pity. I felt Laura's reassuring presence beside me as I cleared my throat. "Actually, Dad, I've been quite busy with my real estate investments," I began. Uncle Stanley interrupted with a chuckle. "Investments? Is that what we're calling it these days? Fixing up houses is honest work, boy, but let's not dress it up with fancy terminology." Several family members laughed, and my mother shot me a look that clearly said, "Don't make a scene." "Stanley's right," my father added with forced joviality. "Nothing wrong with what you do, son, but in this family, we value precision in language. Investment portfolios are what I manage. What you do is more hands-on." More laughter rippled through the room. I saw Laura stiffen beside me, but I gently touched her arm. This was playing out exactly as expected. "How's that starter apartment working out for you?" Garrett asked, swirling his scotch. "Still in that same place in Somerville?" "He is," my mother answered for me. "Though I keep telling him he could afford something better if he'd just consider a career change. There's still time, you know." She directed this last comment at me with a tight smile. "Not everyone can afford to live in a building like this," Uncle Stanley declared, gesturing around at my parents' apartment. "Property in Back Bay is for people who made smart choices early on. I doubt Ethan could even afford a closet in this neighborhood," Cousin Parker added, earning another round of chuckles. "Our poor relation," Aunt Judith said with mock sympathy that contained more than a hint of genuine condescension. The room erupted in laughter, the kind that bonds some people while excluding others. I had been the butt of family jokes for years, but something about this moment, sitting in an apartment building that I owned, while they laughed at my supposed poverty, crystallized everything. I waited for the laughter to subside, maintaining a calm exterior while I reached for the leather portfolio beside me. Laura gave me an encouraging nod. "Actually," I said, my voice steady and clear, cutting through the remaining chuckles, "I wanted to share some news about my work since everyone seems so interested." "Of course, dear," my mother said indulgently. "We're always interested." I removed several documents from my portfolio and held them up. "I wanted to let you know that I actually own this building. I've been your landlord for the past 6 months. The silence that followed was absolute. Faces froze in expressions of confusion, disbelief, and shock. My father was the first to recover. "That's not possible," he stated flatly. "This building is owned by Boston Heritage Properties. We've met the management team. Boston Heritage Properties is my LLC," I explained, passing him the incorporation documents and property deed. "The management team works for me. I'm the principal owner of this building and 11 other properties across Boston." My father scanned the documents, his face paling. My mother peered over his shoulder, her perfectly composed expression crumbling. "This is some kind of joke," Garrett declared, setting down his drink and approaching to examine the papers. "It's not a joke," I said, pulling out additional documentation, bank statements, property portfolios, asset summaries. "I've been investing in real estate for years now. That construction job you all dismiss gave me the knowledge and connections to identify undervalued properties. I now own 12 buildings with a total of 86 units, along with 5 commercial properties." Uncle Stanley snatched the papers from my father's hands. "This can't be right. The numbers here would make you the most financially successful person in this room." Laura finished for him when he trailed off, unable to complete the thought. The room erupted into chaos. My mother collapsed onto the sofa, fanning herself dramatically. My father demanded further proof, his voice rising as I calmly provided document after document. Kimberly stared at me with new eyes, reassessing everything she thought she knew about her middle brother. Garrett poured himself another drink, larger than the last. "Why wouldn't you tell us?" my mother finally asked, her voice small and hurt, as if I had somehow betrayed her by succeeding without her knowledge or approval. "Would you have believed me?" I countered. "Or would you have dismissed it as just fixing up houses or playing at being a businessman? We always supported you," my father insisted, though his tone lacked conviction. "You supported a version of success that looked like yours," I corrected him. "When I chose a different path, you wrote me off as a disappointment." "That's not fair," my mother began, but Kimberly unexpectedly cut her off. "Yes, it is," she said quietly. "We all did that to him. We decided his choices weren't valid because they didn't match our definition of success." The room fell silent again as this acknowledgement hung in the air. Uncle Stanley was still reviewing my financial statements, his expression oscillating between disbelief and reluctant respect. "So all those improvements to the building," my father started, "were my decisions?" I confirmed. "The lobby renovation, the new security system, the upgraded heating. All approved and funded by me." "And our rent increases last year?" Aunt Judith asked sharply. "Were below market rate," I explained. "For all family members. I could have charged much more." This revelation seemed to stun them further, the idea that I had shown them consideration even while they continued to belittle me. As the initial shock began to wear off, the questions became more specific, more practical. How had I started? Who had taught me? What was my strategy? Beneath the questions, I could sense a fundamental recalibration happening. My family was seeing me clearly, perhaps for the first time. Some reactions were predictable. Uncle Stanley quickly moved from disbelief to taking credit. "I always said you had good business sense. Must be the Montgomery genes." My mother began constructing a narrative where she had always known I had potential. Several cousins immediately inquired about investment opportunities. Others were more surprising. My father sat quietly, examining the documents with an expression I couldn't quite read. Kimberly moved to sit beside me, squeezing my arm in what seemed like genuine admiration. And Garrett, after his third scotch, simply raised his glass in a silent toast that contained what might have been respect. The family meeting, usually so structured and formal, dissolved into separate conversations. Some relatives left early, processing this shift in family hierarchy. Others lingered, suddenly interested in my insights on property values and investment strategies. Through it all, Laura remained by my side, her presence grounding me as years of family dynamics were upended in a single afternoon. The revelation of my property ownership created an immediate fracture in the carefully maintained facade of Montgomery family harmony. As the initial shock gave way to varied reactions, the spacious apartment seemed to divide into factions before my eyes. My father, always the corporate strategist, recovered his composure first. His face hardened as he handed back my documents with mechanical precision. "So you've been deliberately deceiving us," he said, his tone making it an accusation rather than a question. "Pretending to struggle financially while secretly becoming our landlord. I'm not sure whether to be impressed by your business acumen or disappointed by your dishonesty." "I wasn't dishonest," I countered evenly. "I just didn't volunteer information to people who never actually asked about my business. You all assumed I was struggling because it fit your narrative." My mother's reaction veered between embarrassment and attempted damage control. "Well, this is certainly unexpected," she said with a brittle laugh, glancing nervously at the other family members witnessing this unfolding drama. "Though I always told your father you had an entrepreneurial spirit, didn't I, Brian?" My father's tight jaw indicated this was news to him, but he nodded stiffly for appearance's sake. Uncle Stanley, ever the family patriarch, attempted to reassert control over the situation. "Well, well, well," he boomed, clapping me on the shoulder with sudden familiarity. "Our Ethan has been playing his cards close to the chest. Always knew there was more to you than met the eye, boy. Now, about this property management company of yours. I have some capital that might be looking for the right opportunity." His transparent pivot from condescension to opportunism might have been amusing if it weren't so predictable. "Thank you, Uncle Stanley, but my investment group is closed to new partners at the moment," I replied politely but firmly. Across the room, I noticed Garrett had moved to the window, staring out at the Boston skyline with his tumbler of scotch. His reflection in the glass showed a complex mix of emotions: shock, reassessment, and something that might have been respect or resentment, possibly both. When he finally turned to face me, he asked the one question I hadn't anticipated. "How much are you worth, exactly?" The directness was pure Garrett, cutting straight to the metric that, in his mind, determined one's value. "That's not really appropriate to discuss here," Laura interjected smoothly. Garrett ignored her, his eyes locked on mine. "Ballpark it for me." "More than me? More than Dad?" The room quieted, attention shifting back to us. I hesitated, then decided that continued honesty was the only way forward. "Based on current market valuations and equity positions, substantially more than both combined," I answered quietly. Garrett nodded slowly, drained his glass, and set it down with deliberate care. "Well played, little brother," he said with a short, humorless laugh. "While I was cutting people open and Kimberly was billing by the hour, you were building an actual empire. The family underachiever. That's rich." The wordplay wasn't lost on anyone. My mother, desperately trying to salvage the situation, suggested we all sit down for coffee and discuss this wonderful news properly. But the carefully orchestrated family meeting had already disintegrated beyond recovery. Some relatives were already making excuses to leave, uncomfortable with the shifted power dynamic. Others were suddenly very interested in my professional insights, asking questions about market trends and investment strategies with transparent self-interest. In the midst of this chaos, I felt a light touch on my arm and turned to find Kimberly. Unlike the others, her expression held no calculation or resentment, just a kind of weary relief. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly, gesturing toward the balcony. "Alone?" Once outside, away from the family tumult, she leaned against the railing and let out a long breath. "I always thought you were the lucky one," she confessed. "But I never had the courage to say it." "Lucky?" I repeated, surprised. "The family disappointment? The one who escaped," she clarified. "You found your own path while the rest of us stayed trapped in Mom and Dad's expectations." She hesitated, then added, "My firm is downsizing. I'll probably be let go in the next round. I've been terrified to tell anyone." "I know," I admitted. "I've heard rumors through industry connections." She looked startled, then laughed softly. "Of course you have. You probably know more about what's happening in this city than all of us combined." She turned to face me directly. "I'm proud of you, Ethan. Not because you're rich now, but because you had the courage to define success on your own terms." Her sincerity touched me deeply. In all our years of family competition, this was perhaps the first authentic moment we'd shared as adults. Back inside, the apartment had largely emptied. My parents were in the kitchen, speaking in hushed, urgent tones that ceased abruptly when Laura and I approached to say goodbye. "We should discuss all this further," my father said stiffly. "Perhaps over dinner next week. There are implications to consider." I understood the subtext. He needed time to process this shift, to determine how my newfound status affected the family hierarchy and his position within it. "I'd like that," I agreed, surprised to find I meant it. Despite everything, they were still my family, and part of me hoped this revelation might eventually lead to more honest relationships. As Laura and I prepared to leave, Aunt Judith approached, her expression pinched. "I assume our rental agreement remains unchanged?" she asked, always practical even in emotional situations. "Of course," I assured her. "Nothing changes for any family member." Uncle Stanley overheard and joined us, his initial shock now fully transformed into opportunistic interest. "Smart business strategy, keeping it in the family," he said with a knowing wink that suggested he believed we shared some unspoken capitalist understanding. "We should talk privately sometime. I have some insights about real estate development that could be valuable to someone in your position." I nodded noncommittally, knowing his insights would likely be outdated conventional wisdom at best. "I'll be in touch." As we made our final goodbyes, my mother pulled me into a stiff hug. "We always believed in you," she whispered, already rewriting history. "In your own way." I didn't contradict her. The property documents had spoken loudly enough. In the elevator descending to the lobby, Laura let out a long breath. "Well, that was exactly what I expected," I finished for her. "And nothing like I expected, all at once." She squeezed my hand. "You did it. No more secrets, no more diminishing yourself." The doorman nodded respectfully as we exited. "Have a good evening, Mr. Montgomery," he said, the simple address now carrying new meaning in the context of the building ownership. In the car, I sat quietly for a moment before starting the engine, processing the seismic shift that had just occurred. Years of being overlooked and underestimated had ended in a single afternoon. The carefully maintained Montgomery family hierarchy had been fundamentally reorganized. "Are you okay?" Laura asked gently. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Part of me feels relieved, like I've finally set down a heavy weight I've been carrying for years. And part of me is sad that it took financial success for them to see me as valuable." "They're adjusting to a new reality," she reminded me. "Give them time." As we drove away from the building, my building, I realized that regardless of how my family ultimately processed this revelation, I had finally achieved something beyond material success. I had claimed the right to define my own worth, independent of their approval or understanding. The family meeting had ended, but a new chapter in the Montgomery family story was just beginning. The week following my revelation passed in a blur of messages and calls from family members. Each reached out individually, their approaches as varied as their personalities, all attempting to navigate our newly recalibrated relationship. My father was the first, calling early Monday morning from his office. "I've been reviewing your portfolio documents," he began without preamble. Impressive diversification strategy. The commercial properties in particular show foresight. Coming from him, this was high praise, though characteristically focused on the financial rather than personal aspects. We spoke for nearly an hour, our conversation more equal than any we'd had before. For the first time, he asked questions about my business decisions and actually listened to the answers. I may have misunderstood your path, he acknowledged near the end of our call, the closest thing to an apology his pride would allow. Perhaps we could meet monthly to discuss investment strategies. I could offer some perspective from my experience. I recognized this for what it was, an attempt to reclaim some authority in our relationship while also connecting on new terms. I'd appreciate that, I responded sincerely. My mother's approach was more emotional and revisionist. She arrived unannounced at one of my smaller properties where I was overseeing renovations, bearing an expensive bottle of champagne to celebrate your success, and a photo album I'd never seen before. I've always kept these, she said, opening the album to reveal childhood drawings, school projects, and candid photos of me working on various building projects as a teenager. I always knew you had special talents, Ethan. I told everyone you had an eye for design and structure. While her selective memory rewrote years of dismissal and disappointment, I chose not to challenge her narrative. The photos themselves revealed something touching. She had been paying attention in her way, even if she hadn't known how to value what she saw. Thanks for keeping these, Mom, I said simply, accepting the gesture for what it was, an attempt to bridge the chasm between us. Garrett's response came in the form of an unexpected visit to my office. He looked less polished than usual, his designer suit replaced by casual clothes, his typical confidence subdued. My marriage is over, my department's funding has been cut, and I just found out my younger brother owns half of Boston, he said without greeting, dropping into the chair across from my desk. I think I'm having a midlife crisis. His honesty surprised me. For the first time, Garrett was speaking to me without the protective armor of superiority. We talked for hours, about his divorce, about the pressure he'd always felt to be the perfect Montgomery son, about how exhausting it was to maintain appearances while his personal life crumbled. I never envied you before, he admitted, but I envy your freedom now. You built something real while I built a life that looked good to other people. By the time he left, something fundamental had shifted between us. The competitive hierarchy that had defined our relationship since childhood had dissolved, replaced by something approaching mutual respect. Kimberly's transformation was the most profound. 2 weeks after the family meeting, she called to invite me to coffee. When we met, she slid a formal letter across the table. My resignation from the firm, she explained. Effective next month. Are you sure? I asked, knowing how much of her identity had been wrapped up in being a successful attorney. For the first time in my adult life, yes, she said with quiet certainty. Watching you succeed on your own terms made me realize I've been living someone else's dream. We discussed her plans. She wanted to transition to real estate law, specifically working with affordable housing developers. Her eyes lit up when she talked about using her legal expertise for projects with social impact. I could use someone with your skills, I offered carefully. The legal aspects of my business are getting more complex. If you're interested, there's a place for you. The partnership we formed in the following months transformed both our business and our relationship. Kimberly handled the legal and compliance aspects of our growing portfolio with the same precision she'd once applied to corporate law, but with newfound purpose and considerably less stress. Our childhood competitiveness evolved into complementary collaboration. Extended family members adjusted to the new reality in their own ways. Uncle Stanley still attempted to offer unwanted business advice, though now with a deference that acknowledged my success. Aunt Judith approached me about refinancing her mortgage, which I arranged through banking connections at favorable terms. Cousins who had once dismissed me now sought career advice or introductions to industry contacts. My parents adapted gradually to the shifted family dynamic. Our monthly dinners became a new tradition, sometimes tense, occasionally warm, always more authentic than our interactions had been before. My father stopped introducing me as Ethan, who works in construction, and began proudly mentioning my son, the real estate developer. My mother's social media suddenly featured photos of us together at property openings or family events, her captions emphasizing how she had always encouraged Ethan's entrepreneurial spirit. Raymond watched these family developments with amused wisdom. Families are like investments, he observed one evening as we reviewed plans for a new commercial project. They perform better when you manage your expectations and focus on long-term growth rather than short-term returns. His mentorship had evolved into a deep friendship that transcended business. When he announced his plan to retire fully in travel, I purchased his ownership stakes in our joint ventures, ensuring his financial security while honoring the immeasurable value of his guidance. Laura remained my emotional anchor throughout these changes. 6 months after the family meeting, I took her to the very first property we had renovated together, the duplex that had launched my investment career. I had secretly repurchased it and restored the unit where we had spent countless evenings planning and dreaming. "Why are we here?" she asked as I unlocked the door to reveal the beautifully renovated space, now furnished with pieces that told the story of our journey together. "Because this is where it all started," I explained, leading her to the bay window where we had once sat sketching renovation plans on takeout napkins. "And I wanted to be here when I ask what comes next." I knelt and presented a vintage ring box, inside not a diamond, but a small brass key. "This is the key to our first home that's truly ours," I said. "Not an investment property, not a temporary space, a home we'll build together. Will you marry me?" Her tearful yes marked the beginning of our next chapter, one defined by partnership rather than performance, by joy rather than validation. As our business continued to grow, we established the Montgomery Foundation, focusing on affordable housing initiatives and education programs for disadvantaged youth interested in construction and real estate. The work brought deeper fulfillment than any property acquisition, creating legacy beyond financial wealth. My journey from family underachiever to successful investor taught me lessons that no business school could provide. I learned that true success isn't measured by others' recognition but by alignment with personal values. I discovered that authentic relationships require vulnerability rather than perfection. Most importantly, I realized that wealth creates opportunity for impact beyond material comfort. The annual Montgomery Family Conference underwent its own transformation. Rather than competitive achievement reporting, it evolved into a more balanced family gathering. The most recent meeting, held at Laura's and my new home, included discussions of challenges alongside successes, creating space for honesty that had been missing for generations. Looking around the table at my family, imperfect, evolving, but finally authentic, I felt a sense of accomplishment deeper than any property acquisition had provided. The greatest investment I had made wasn't in real estate but in the courage to define success on my own terms and the patience to build relationships based on truth rather than appearance. As Garrett raised his glass for a toast, I thought about how far we had come from that confrontational day when they had called me poor, and I had revealed my ownership of their building. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary, not just for my own growth, but for our family's evolution from performance to genuine connection. Life's most valuable assets, I had learned, aren't listed on any balance sheet. Have you ever had to stand your ground with family who didn't believe in your dreams? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Like this video if you've ever had to prove someone wrong about your potential. Subscribe for more real-life stories about family dynamics and success against the odds. And share this with someone who needs a reminder that success looks different for everyone. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving others wrong, but finding the strength to stay true to your own path.